younger people can get into agriculture, where they can succeed, and where we can continue to have support for things like replant and adopting new cultivars, grapes and fruit trees that are more climate resilient.
Okay, so our next question is on business. So small businesses are the backbone of rural economies like boundary-similkameen. Yet many face challenges such as rising costs, regulatory burdens, and difficulties accessing funding. What specific policies or initiatives would you advocate to support small business growth and resilience in the region?
Thank you. You already know the system, so that's great.
I figured I was probably next. Thank you for the question. I think, so one of the honors that I've had is, when I got elected, the Premier called last time and said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I got to figure out how to do this MLA job before I'm going to do anything else. But I said, we really need better supports for rural communities across BC. We need structural change in government to be able to support those rural communities. And the small business sector, that's at the heart of those rural communities. The Premier then entrusted me to be the rural guy, essentially, for BC, the Parliamentary Secretary for Rural Development. So I had the opportunity to travel around the province, meeting with rural communities and talking about how do we help them thrive. And a huge part of that, what we hear again and again, what I know from conversations here in Keremeos from the past, is how do we support community-led initiatives, right? So community knows, whether we're talking watershed management, whether we're talking about economic development potential, communities know what they need. So how do we entrust more of that decision-making to communities so they can make the decisions they need to make? So we designed programs, for example, the Rural Economic Development Infrastructure Program, that is going to communities and saying, you tell us what your community needs to help your small business sector, to help your communities thrive, and we will support that. So we will help with the government side of things. We will help fund and help engage and encourage you to do the things you know what you need to do in your community. And that theme, that has now been woven through all sorts of the behavior of how government in Victoria is delivering policy and programs. It's supporting the nonprofits in your communities, which in turn support your communities. It's supporting economic development proposals coming forward from community instead of from Victoria. And so in that space, to me, it is figuring out how do we help encourage communities to take the reins on what they want their futures to be.
I think we start community first perspective. With respect to local businesses, I think one thing to look to is as we adapt to climate change and to these events, and you look at Princeton, boil water advisory, look at Grand Forks with the dike, we look at the forest fire from last summer up on the hills in Suyas, taking money from carbon tax, adding carbon tax to the big polluters, to oil and gas sector, and redirecting those funds back to communities for precisely the type of projects that are going to make these communities more climate resilient. And by using a procurement strategy for local companies first, so that that work is done in the community, it's envisioned by the community, that it's an opportunity for funding to flow from largest polluters to the communities that are on the front lines, and that those dollars create jobs here, and hopefully permanent jobs down the road.
I'm starting to notice a theme here tonight. Bribing you with your own money. Small business is what drives the Canadian economy. And what we experienced over the last 3.5 years was a war on small business. With levers being used with insurance, with municipal bylaw. You could walk into a Walmart or a Costco without wearing a mask, but small business was really hurt, and we wiped out a lot of small businesses. The government overreach we're seeing in our province right now has come to ridiculous levels, right? Government needs to get out of the way. These regulations are strangling, are throttling the economy, and we need to get out and just let them do what they do. This province is filled with amazing, smart entrepreneurs who will find a solution a lot quicker than government programs will.
Okay, so our next question is around housing access and affordability. Rural communities are facing housing shortages, particularly for low-income and middle-income families. What policies will you support to address housing affordability in boundary-similkameen while also ensuring sustainable development practices?
Presently, I'm living in a motorhome. It's not terrible, but it's an experience. It's an education. And hopefully, I'll be building a house in the next couple of years. But I'm tremendously fortunate. Part of our move from the Lower Mainland, most recently up to Christina Lake, was looking at the writing on the wall and recognizing, without the very generously affordable rent that we were lucky to have, we would be not saving any money, frozen. BC Greens would like to increase assistance for housing, especially for low-income seniors and low-income families, so that housing can be afforded. They also would like to create more education programs to get young people into the housing sector, into construction jobs, to alleviate labor shortages that are holding us back. And we'd also like to cut red tape and provide greater support for alternative building materials that are lower carbon, that are healthier for a community, and can be sourced locally. And so there's lots of economic opportunity that can happen locally. There's immediate changes with increased funding to make sure people are housed. And there's hopefully a long-term effect, getting more people into the construction industry so that we can get out of this acute crisis and maintain construction of new homes with our population growth over time.
I was talking with a contractor just a little while ago because I'm unfamiliar with the challenges they face. Again, carbon tax makes everything more expensive. Building materials, wages, the cost of doing business goes up, and that's passed along to the consumer. These problems are multifactorial in causation, right? One of them is really not a provincial purview. The fact that we're bringing over 2 million people a year into this country, I think it is pretty obvious that you're going to have housing issues bringing that many new Canadians into our country. To face these issues, there needs to be capacity building. When the contractors that I've talked to, they say, like Kelowna does a really good job at getting permitting done quickly, being able to get construction, it's a pretty quick flash to bang there. Whereas some communities, you're waiting up to a year for permitting. Right? Again, red tape, and that comes to a capacity building within the specific municipality. So there's a lot of things that we can do to speed this up. Again, taxing, it makes the cost of doing business so much more. Reduction in the size of government, reduction in the red tape, pass those savings on to the consumer.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, I think we see this across the province, we see this across the country, we see it across North America, how challenging it has become for people to get into an affordable home, a home that they can reasonably acquire. And so that's why, a couple of years ago, that's why we created a standalone ministry to be able to tackle this, because it is an issue everywhere, and we need some creative solutions to be able to address it. Through that kind of investment and that focus on housing, that is why, for example, you see dozens of new homes in Keremeos down the road here, because government is helping the community lead and the community be able to deliver that. And so I know I see people in the audience that work for the society, right? That's not government doing all that work, that is local people leading. They'll say, this is what we need to do. I have a ton of respect for that, and that's the kind of opportunity the government can step up and be able to deliver. I would say there's a bunch of other pieces, and I'm sure we'll have some time to talk about it, but like speculation tax. Let's get the speculators out of the market so that those homes are available for people that are going to live in them. And it's easy to get an exemption. If you're going to rent it, if you're going to do anything, that's fine. But if you're leaving it empty, we're going to have you help offset the costs that we're dealing with across the board. It's through things like saying, you know what, you go through an official community planning process here in Keremeos, then if you have a requirement, if you have a proposal in front of that local government to say, we're going to do something that is aligned with the community plan, then you don't have to go to a public hearing to go and start that process again and create those delays in permitting, right? So it's things like that to streamline, to get rid of some of that red tape that has been in the system, and be able to streamline that, support people, be able to invest in things like long-term care, 200 new long-term care beds in Penticton. Those are the kinds of investments that help unlock more doors for all of us in our communities.
Okay, so our next topic is public transit. Public transit in rural areas remains a challenge, limiting access to essential services. How would you improve public transit infrastructure and accessibility in boundary-similkameen to better serve rural communities such as Headley, Keremeos, or Coston?
You got nothing.
Do you want public transit in Headley, Coston? Is this something that the small communities want?
Yes.
Yeah?
Big time.
It's,
Some form of.
Let me guess, drop the carbon tax.
that'd be a good start. That'd be a good start. Yeah, I'm afraid I can't speak intelligently on the transportation needs of Headley and Coston, but I'll just leave it at that.
So in Victoria, we have a rural caucus, and in our rural caucus, we come together to say, like, what are the top priority issues for rural BC? At the top of that list is healthcare. Second on that list is transit, and third on that list is transit for healthcare. Those are some of the top priorities across BC in terms of how do we help support communities. You know how difficult it is if you live here and you don't have access to your own car to get to a specialist appointment, to get to any appointment, potentially, right? So those challenges in transit are very, very real for our rural communities. We have to figure out how to support that. The traditional model of BC Transit is not very functional for our rural communities, right? It doesn't do a great job. It may be helpful, but we need inter-community transit, and we need to be able to have a BC Transit model that is creative enough to support kind of creative models of what that looks like. They have some of those in other places. We've looked at examples, and we've trialed some of these in BC, but looked at examples like Halifax, where they have small vehicle transportation, so that you can get on-demand rides, and it's still a partnership between local government, between the provincial government, between potentially the healthcare providers in those systems. So it's opportunities like that, I think, to be able to say, how do we creatively solve this problem? Specifically on the transportation for rural healthcare, we've been reiterating that need for rural communities to the Premier. And you'll see, I guess it was 10 days ago, we had the opportunity to make an announcement we have a travel assistance program in BC that helps people get to appointments. All that it covers is flights and ferries. And for somebody in Keremeos, that's not particularly helpful. And so what we've done is we've said, let's open that up so that if you have to claim mileage for a drive to Vancouver, you have that covered. So those kinds of announcements, that kind of move is to help cover transit costs, help make transit work better for people that need it in rural communities.
Transit's huge. If we're talking carbon, transit is close to 40% of BC's carbon. That's huge. We are overdue for a generational shift in how we get around. It doesn't mean the elimination of roads, but we need our next generation to grow up not needing 2 cars or 3 cars for every household, because we can't sustain that. The BC Greens would like to make public transit free across the province in our most rural or remote areas, starting with at least 4 regular scheduled bus services every day and a target of hourly service everywhere. And that'll take money. But currently, BC Highways budget is about $3 billion, $1 billion of which comes from gas tax, 2/3 of which come from general revenue that everyone pays for, but only drivers reap the principal benefit. So for our young people and our seniors and those who want to take public transit, it's overdue. We need to make it simple. It doesn't have to be complicated to make your plan for the day. You need to check a schedule, know it's coming hourly, know it's on the 25-minute mark, go to your bus stop and know if you're going east or west. And that's it. And allow people to be mobile, to move across the province, to get to appointments. And yeah, additionally, as Rolly mentioned, BC Greens would also like to expand travel assistance programs to get you to medical appointments. It's essential to lower that barrier to care for rural populations, because it's not the same for any of us to get to an appointment or do our shopping as it is for folks in a major center. So the BC Greens, free transit, regular transit across the province. It's time.